Welcome to the Sacred Feminine Power podcast, where we explore the many facets of feminine power and why it is so important for women and for men to step into this power in our world at this time. This is Emmy from Feminine Revered, and my wonderful guest for today is Iosellev Josie Castañeda. Josie is a modern day curandera. At an early age, she was introduced to the practice of curanderismo as a way of life. Today, Josie serves her Miami community as a verbera, one who works with herbs. She shares her knowledge with depth, joy, and clarity. It is so good to have you with us, Josie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Emmy. Thank you so much for having me. Wonderful pronunciation.
Oh, thank you. I had to practice a little bit for those ones, so thank you. And it's really great to have
Perfect.
you with us, and I cannot wait to see where our conversation takes us today. But
Yes,
before
I'm
we
very
come,
excited.
yes, yeah, me too. And before we dive any deeper into this magical world of curanderismo, I would love to find out from you, what does sacred feminine power mean to you personally?
Oh my goodness. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. Um, I started sort of like the circling back to my own ancestry with, if you want to call it yoga. And then from that, of course, once you get into yoga, if you're really paying attention, you start to get into the deeper layers of where this comes from, which is India. And of course, the sacred feminine is very big in India. It's one of the places where I would say it's probably still as undiluted as possible, even though they were colonized. So for me, I am a practitioner of Trividya, which is the goddess-based lineage in India. And that to me is the reverence of everything. You know, we talk about Mother Earth because she is feminine, right? Because there is fertility, because there is this power of creation and creativity. So for me, sacred feminine is absolutely everything. So yeah.
Beautiful. Couldn't agree with you more. And I'm sure we're going to go a bit deeper into these themes a little bit later on. But again, before we go there, Josie, I would love to hear a little bit about your own journey and especially about a challenge that you have faced that's really helped you to activate the sacred feminine power within you.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I guess I could start at the beginning. Like I mentioned, you know, I learned first meditation. And then through meditation, then I went through what we call the yoga asanas, right? The physical yoga. And then from there, I was like, oh, Ayurveda. And then from there, it was traditional Western herbalism. And then through there, I was like, wait, there's curanderismo in my lineage, you know, Mexican, Cuban. So it became a thing of, oh, we also have that. We also have this. Maybe not to the level and to the categorization and the schooling of it, but we have it in my lineage. And I think because I've gone through all of those different sort of modalities, that's been probably the hardest. That people feel like if you're born into a lineage, then that's what it is, and you should always have it, right? And so that I think that's probably one of the things that I've noticed. I mean, people are very welcoming, but people also question, like, really, do you really do this? Did you really learn this? How did you learn it? And of course, everybody wants to know, where's your certification? Where, you know, like things like that, where the reality is like no, this is actually a lineage that's taught orally, and that is it's a living tradition. It's something you live, you know, it's a way of life. And so I think a lot of people just have that question mark, like, how did you get from one end to the other? Right. But the reality is that, you know, if you look at it from an eagle eye perspective, they're all really the same. They all are about Mother Earth. They're all about that creative energy. You can call it anything you want, of course, right? And every tradition calls it something different. But I think that has been my biggest challenge for people to understand that, yes, it's actually the same. It's just maybe a different picture slash mirror that we're looking at, you know? Yeah.
That's fascinating. I love how you're bringing in that perspective of it. And I'm wondering how this challenge has in a way also blessed you. What are the gifts of that challenge for you now?
Yeah. Wonderful question. I think compassion is number one. Having a lot of compassion for the people that question and question and question and question. And it's like, actually, that's their mirror. You know, at some point you see, you know, as a healer, because I'm a full-time healer now, you know, what happens is you start to understand that sometimes the questions really, really have a sense. There's a reason for them. And then sometimes the questions are really, it skips. And all of a sudden the questions are really questions that they want to ask themselves, but they don't know how to. And so for me, it's become a big compassion too, where I have to, take a breath and say, okay, this person really doesn't understand. So how can I just sit here and listen and be compassionate and not react, right? And just wait. Because eventually when I do wait, for those people that do stick around, they eventually get back to like this event in their life where they, with something happened and all of a sudden there was question marks for everything. And so that's really the key of that. And so for me, I think that's been the biggest gift, understanding that some people um you have to wait on some people to get to what the real question is, which is underneath all of the questioning they have. And just having compassion for them, having compassion. I think that's been the biggest blessing for that. Yeah.
Beautiful. And compassion certainly is a huge, huge, what would I even call it? Something that we certainly need a huge amount of in our world as it is today. And as we're experiencing all these shifts and changes as humanity, as a collective, and also as beings on this beautiful planet of ours. So being able to intentionally cultivate that compassion is so, so very important. So I love how you are consciously bringing this into all that you do and into this reflection process as well. And I would also imagine that some of these questions that are coming to you are also mirrored within you, isn't that as well, that you're finding yourself?
Always, always. Yeah. I have a teacher, Julia Grace, who says, when you become a healer, a lot of the people that you will see are people who are healing what you're healing at that moment. And at first I was like, no. And then I was like, yes.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that a lot in my own practice as well. And in fact, most of my clients are really reflections of me, and they really help me to go deeper in my own quest and my own journey as well, in terms of my own healing and transformation as well. So that's
Yep,
beautiful.
exactly.
Wonderful. Well, Josie, in the work that you do as a curandera, as a verbera, I know that there's often these energetic afflictions, and this is kind of related to what you shared already, but these energetic afflictions that then over time can become physical symptoms. How do you spot the difference between the two in the work that you do as a curandera?
Yeah. So what I would say is in curanderismo, one of the core things that we talk about is the plática, or what some people have translated. Plática means conversation. But it has been sort of translated as a heart talk, because what we do as curanderos or curanderas is we sit with somebody and we have this very long, it is quote unquote the intake form for herbalists out there, but it's more than that, because you're not just, checking off a list. You're actually having or trying to have a conversation that's open and in depth with somebody. And so with that conversation, what we kind of start doing is you kind of understand how the mind of this person works. And with that comes emotion. And so in curanderismo are, a lot of not a lot, because, we have, it's, it's a little bit of everything, but part of the diagnosis is the emotional content of the person. And so the way that we do it is that we understand certain emotions sort of signify certain diseases or certain afflictions. And so that's kind of like how we use that. And it's really beautiful because, there is a book that I love. Can't remember the name of it right now, but it talks about curanderismo being one of the first psychotherapies, or being the first, being the first psychotherapy out there in the world, because you're actually having that conversation, with somebody before you give them anything else. And it's not just, again, it's not just ticking boxes. It's actually like having a real conversation. And so that's sort of like how we work with emotion and with energy, because then the emotion gives us sort of like a pathway to an energy. And then the energy that, at least depending on the curandero and curandera, that energy tells us something. That's information. And then based on that, then we start to work with, okay, well, your physical problems really are emotional problems, which really stem from this root of either trauma or instability or, stuff like that. But for the most part, and for me at least, because there's different types of healers out there in this tradition. But for me, I don't always think that physical issues are emotional or energetic, only because sometimes you just fell and you hit your foot. Like that's a reality, Now, there's people who would really dilute that and say, well, they fell and they hurt their foot because they're really worried about their children and it's just like, listen, sometimes stuff happens. And sometimes you have to be really clear. And as a healer, I try really hard to make sure that I see the person as a whole, but also try really hard to make sure that I'm not moving between physical issues and energetic issues all the time, because sometimes that's not the reality. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes somebody just hit their foot, but sometimes with the conversation, these emotions come up that direct me to a certain energy, and I say, yeah, that's where we're going. That's what it is. And my job is, one, to be present to it and continue to do my work so that I'm present to it to ask the right questions. And I think that's the part that makes curanderismo so beautiful, is that we can see what the energetics are because we're out of the way ourselves. We're asking the right questions by being present and being fully immersed in this person. And also, I think that's one of the reasons we call it a heart talk, because we're really sort of like heart to heart. So yeah, so that's what I would say when it comes to the energetic and the tradition that we do. And then of course, based on the energy, like all healers, we have a repertoire. Everybody has a different repertoire of what we like to use for herbs or flower essences or different types of limpias, which are the art cleansing. But yeah, that's sort of like in curanderismo, how I use energy and how I translate energy.
Beautiful. I love everything about that, that deep listening, that full presence with the person that you are with, and listening not just with the ears, but listening with your whole presence and sensing the energies
Yeah.
as well. That's really beautiful. Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit earlier on about how the work that you do as a curandera is something that you've inherited through your lineage. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the history behind this, if you don't mind, and how it was that you then came to more consciously step onto this path.
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you. Yes. So my father was of Cuban descent, and my mother is a Toltec indigenous woman from Mexico. My father passed away 7 years ago, and his life, he was born in 1935 in literally what we call the boonies, right? Which is like where there's nothing. It was originally very much a jungle in Cuba. And so, you can imagine there's no doctors. So you gotta learn about plants around you. So that was his upbringing. And then my mother, as a Celtic indigenous woman, she came from, I want to say, fifth or sixth generation of indigenous people that had been oppressed. And so, again, they don't have a lot of faith and trust in allopathic medicine.
Mm,
So, a lot of it is herbs. And so between the two of them, when I remember I had some deep issues when I was very young, I had some deep issues with my lungs, and some digestive issues. And I don't remember going to doctors. I remember getting vaccines, because at that I remember getting vaccinated. And especially because then I was born in 1977. So polio was still sort of like thing. And so, and other things, what do they call it? Chickenpox. Um, so I remember getting vaccines, but like when I was really sick, we weren't a doctor. We were getting, like, I was getting these weird juices and these weird concoctions my dad would make. And so that's sort of how you introduce. Again, nobody says, wow, ginger is for this and mint is, nobody tells you that. They're just like, here, drink this, and you drink it, and that's it. Yeah. So, so that's that's kind of like how I was raised. And even now that I moved back to Miami the last 10 years, my mom and I live together, and, if I say, oh, my stomach is kind of funny, she's like, some yerba buena tea, which is like mint tea. And I'm like, oh yeah. And we have a little garden. Well, we have not a massive, but we have a garden out there specifically for healing herbs. And so she's like, take this, take that, and drink that. But again, nobody tells you want to cool the body, you want to cool the digestion, so all of that stuff that we think of like herbalism today, because a lot of people are studying herbalism, right? But they're studying the properties and they're studying the energetics. None of that is taught. It's just oral. It's like, you have this, drink this, and it might make you feel good. And if that doesn't work, we'll try another herb. And so that's kind of like how I grew up. And, because my parents came from very poor backgrounds, their idea of, survival was education. And so for me, it was very clear: go to school, get a good education, get a good job, buy the house, get married, have the kids. So I did some of that. I left to New York City when I was 17 years old, and I became a fashion designer. I studied in New York. I lived in New York for 30 years, sorry, for 20 years. And then within those 20 years, it became very clear that I no longer wanted to live there, specifically because as you go higher in, corporate ladder, the less creative you are. And as a designer, you can imagine it's like, well, I don't want to manage a group of 20 people. I actually want to sit down and design. And so I knew at some point that things were shifting, but I also knew that I wanted my own business. And so originally, how I started was making, I studied with herbalists, Northeast herbalists in New York City. And then from there, I realized, oh my God, this has been in my family forever. Like, how did I not realize this, and because of that, I got really, I don't know, it felt like something was triggered, and like I mentioned, my teacher, Julia Grace, when I met her and started talking to her, she's like, Mexico has this rich history of herbs and curanderismo. And I was like, you're right. Like, and so she was very pivotal in giving me confidence to really say, okay, this is something that I can use for myself. And that's how I started making little things here and there. And then people would ask me like, hey, I noticed that you had a cold and it went away fast. What did you take? I'm like, oh, I took this or I made this. And that's how I started. So, and then from there came my wellness brand, Curandera Remedies. And then from there, all these other things happened. But originally, it was really just for me. It was really just for me for self-care, if you want to call that today, and this is now 10, 15, this is probably like 17 years ago. So, back then we didn't have the word wellness or even as a category, right? We didn't have the word self-care. We didn't have any of these words. We have them now, but I think that's originally how it all started for me. Like circling back to understanding that not only is this in my family lineage, but now that I have more information from all these beautiful and amazing herbalists, now I can actually be more conscientious of the herbs that I take and how I take them. And that was very important, obviously. And so from there, again, people were just asking me like, how did you do this? How did you do that? And so I started sharing and making, and the next thing you knew, I was, selling stuff. So yeah, it was very soft. And it took about 5, 6 years, all of that to happen. But once I was in it fully, and it was like, wow, I really love this, and I would love to sit in front of people and talk to them and see how, and ask them. I used to love, so today we call it the survey, from a marketing point of view. It's like, how did you feel? Did you like the feel? Did you like the smell? Did the oil feel nice on your skin? Like I remember asking all those questions because I really was curious and I wanted to make a really good product. And so it happened very organically. And I'm really happy that it did. And it's been a minute now, but I still love it. I still love to make custom products for my clients, and I still love, to make things overall for the brand. But like I really love the one-on-one, which is how I started. So yeah, that was the runaround to like being here today. Eventually you realize, oh wow, there's herbalism, and then there's herbalism, and everybody has it in the background. Everybody in every heritage, there's traditional forms of herbalism. Some are more, a lot of us when we come to the United States, and this is the conversations that I'm having now, specifically with the release of the book, people are like, wow, well, my grandmother, she never wanted me to do this, and she didn't want to teach me this, and she did. And it's like, when we become immigrants and we come to another place, we just want to assimilate, and we want to be able to work hard and, and be part of the culture. And so what does that mean? That means that we strip away our natural or original culture. And so a lot of the conversations today are now, with the people that I'm having conversations with is, hey, I'm happy that there's a book out there that kind of explains this and that kind of bridges both the traditional Western herbalism and the Latin herbalism. Because again, we are, we're not exactly the same, but we have a lot of influence with each other. And so it's a beautiful sort of like circle back for me. And it's been something that I've really been enjoying seeing. But that's in a nutshell sort of my story.
Beautiful. Yeah, what a beautiful, graceful, organic initiation onto the path of curandera. That's really beautiful. And I love how you were using the herbs on yourself first and really intimately getting to know them, and then could start supporting others and advising others as well. That's very powerful. Now,
Yeah, that's the key.
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
That's the key for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. Now, I know that you also work with ritual, you work with sound healing, you work with different kinds of healing modalities. How do they all blend together with curanderismo and the herbalism that you practice?
Yeah. So a lot of the times when I do one-on-one sessions, especially, I have a signature session that I call Reiki Limpia, which is a 45-minute receiving of energy of Reiki, or Reiki means energy. So just said energy. So really it's a 45-minute Reiki transmission. And then I ended with a limpia. And there's different types of limpias in Latin America. So depending on what the person is working for, sometimes we do herbs with, we do limpias with herbs. Sometimes we do limpias with sound, which we call limpia sonora. Sonora means sound. And sometimes we do limpias with the egg, the traditional egg that everybody loves. Which by the way, is not for everybody, just putting it out there. We also do limpias with baños, which is, water. We do limpias with fire. So we have like elementals. And so we go through all the different elements depending on what the person is working on. And so for me, like I love the crystal bowl. I'm very attuned to the frequencies of the sound, but I'm not a sound bath healer, like that's not, but sometimes people, that's the way that's the way their body understands. When children, especially like children, they're very sensitive. You don't really want to do a full on limpia on them. I mean, unless it's something super traumatic, but like sound for them is really wonderful. For pets, sound for them is really wonderful. So one of the beautiful things about curanderismo is that it's very open to being influenced for the right reason. So, some curanderos will see somebody else do something interesting and go, oh, wow, that works for that person. Let me try it and see if it works here. And then they'll try and test and test until they finally get the idea of like, okay, this is the way it works. And it's the same thing for me. Like when I did sound healing, and this was also when I first started, oh my goodness, yeah, like, it was 16 years ago, crystal bowls were very expensive. Nobody had them. Like it was very uncommon. I mean, now that I know they have them on Amazon and all that, but like, I still have my initial set, which was an extreme amount of money back then. But, I taught myself because I understood that there were some people who, herbs on their body was too much, who didn't understand the water bath, that was too much, who definitely couldn't use the fire lipia. So, there are all these different things that I use. And for the most part, and also, I do virtual Reiki lipias. And when I do virtual, I can, I can do a barrida, I can do the herbs. So what do? We use music, we use sound healing. And so, that's one of the beautiful things about curanderismo. I don't know. I mean, I know very little curanderas and curanderas outside of the United States, but the ones I do know, they do all these little weird things. And I'll ask, like, where did you learn that? And they're like, well, I was watching somebody else doing this, and then I thought it was a great idea. And then I practiced for 2 years, and now I know how to do it. And so it's really fascinating because it's part of the tradition, because it's a living tradition also. It kind of changes a little bit with the time. And that's really good and amazing and beautiful. Like we want that. We don't want a tradition that's stuck in the same place, in the 1800s, 1700s, because, one of the things that I do talk about to people a lot is when they want to get into this path, it's like, and there is people out there in Mexico and Latin America that want to teach curanderismo, but, they don't teach you for modern disease or modern afflictions. They teach you for things of the past. And it's like, well, nobody gets that. So why am I learning this? I'm not saying that maybe in the future it wouldn't happen, but at least in the moment, and that's the beauty of curanderismo, that it stays present and it can be changed and it can be influenced for all the positive ways. So for me, all the different modalities, when I really solidified the idea of energy and electromagnetic energy that we emit as human beings and the energy that we feel between our hands, it's when I did Reiki. It was very clear, like, oh, wow, yeah, there is something here, and so that Reiki container really nurtured me, and so for me, I'm always open to different modalities because, I don't know what I don't know. And the only way that I know is if I try something. And so, and that's the beauty too, again, of curanderismo, that it's open to trying different things and to incorporating different things, and ultimately, I'm not doing it just for me. I'm doing it so I can share with others and that I can, support others in their path. So yeah, so all the different modalities, they hold a place for the reasons that I mentioned, because sometimes I'm not physically present with somebody. Sometimes some person is too sensitive to one thing. And so you got to find ways like, how do you, if you really want to help people, because ultimately that's really what we want to do in curanderismo. We want to support and help others. How do we do that the best way? Because sometimes what you already know may not work. So yeah.
Very true. And I love that idea of this living tradition that's dynamic and changes and shifts with the times, and also then adds on new elements to it based on what works and based on what you observe and witness. That's beautiful. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Joseph, I know that you have also recently published a book or written a book which is about to be published. I would love for you to share more about this book and how it all came about.
Yeah. So the book is called Latin Herbalism. Um, and for the most part, it's my story of and my rituals and remedies that have sort of accumulated up to now. And so the book itself, there's this little folder on my laptop that says book that I started way back when. And, I've just been putting stuff in there and little recipes, little rituals. I think it was 19, wait, let me see. I have a very difficult time with time. 1920. Yeah, so I've been accumulating now stuff for I want to say at least 20 years, different formulas, different rituals, and all that. But then I started teaching a course in herbalism or full tradition herbalism because it was a request of students and clients who were like, well, I want to learn more. How do I make this? How do I make that? And so I put something together that is sort of like the basis of the book a little bit. Um, and then in 2023, no, 2022, I got a email from a publisher, Unique Press, which I love. And they asked me there like in October of 2022. They said, would you be open to writing a book about Latin herbalism and modern curanderismo? And I was like, yes, I would love that. Give me more details. They're like, well, the deadline is in March. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. I don't have enough time. But the reason they do that is because some people really do have accumulation of stuff and they really want to write a book. And so those people are kind of ready and prepared. I obviously was not one of those people. And so I said, no, actually, I would need at least a year because I mean, even though I have some information, the red thread of it all, I would need to work on. And so that was 2022. And then at the end of 2023, they were like, okay, you got a year. Are you ready? And I said, yeah. And so that was my project for 2024. And the book released April of 2025, so this year. And so that's what I've been sharing. I've been sharing it at women's gatherings. I've been sharing it at different types of events. And it really truly is so far the work that I've done. It doesn't have everything that I know, of course. There's only limited amount of pages and limited amount of information you can give. But it's definitely a beginner's guidebook. And the feedback that I've gotten so far, which has been beautiful, is that it's very actionable, which is what I wanted. I didn't want another book where you look at it and go, oh, wow, this is great, but like, I need to get all of this stuff and I need to figure all this out. And no, and then it goes back on the shelf. No, I really wanted people to go in and say, oh, I have all this at home and then I can make it. And one of the beautiful things about the book is that it's, my intention was that the organization needed to be very simple. So we start off with my story, which I think is important so you know who wrote the book. And then we go into the energetics of the herb, into the physical energetics. In other words, kind of like the properties and qualities of the herb, so people have an understanding of that. And then we go into apothecary preparations. I think I gave like 25 different preparations of how do you use herbs. This is all the ways you can use them, right? Or things that you can make with herbs to help you. And then we go into the 4 main chapters, which are based on sun energy is digestion, moon energy is the nervous system, heart energy is the cardiovascular system, and also energetics of grief and emotional content like that. And then the last one is, see if I remember, I don't have the book right next to me. um, uh, sun, moon, heart, and breath, which is the respiratory system. And those are the major things that we look at in general, just as folk herbalists. And then the last chapter or semi-last chapter is actually about energy. And so, I started that chapter with forget everything I've taught you because now we're going in the opposite direction because it is very different. Energetics and the energy system isn't treated the same way as the physical system. It doesn't react the same way. It's not osmosis in the same way. So that's the gist of the book, which I love. And then the last chapter, which is probably my favorite, is I introduce you to other curanderos and curanderas, some who are Latin American and some who are not, and some who are mixed race or biracial, because I think it's just as important to understand that Latin herbalism can be housed in those people as well. And so that's pretty much the general idea of the book. I had a really fun time trying to figure out the categories. I had a really beautiful time trying to figure out like how can I organize this in a way that's really simple and approachable. And the feedback has been that. So I am very happy that I feel like I've completed that task. So yeah.
Congratulations. It is a beautiful book. I haven't finished it yet, but I've started diving into it. And I have to say that in addition to all the beauty that is woven into the words and the actual wisdom that you share with that, just the book itself, the way it feels in your hands, the cover of it, it's very gracious. It's a very simple but a very beautiful, powerful design, and I'm old fashioned when it comes to books, so I love to actually hold them in my hands rather than read them on a Kindle. And this book just somehow does it for me in terms of its energy and in terms of how it feels in your hands.
That's
So
beautiful. That's beautiful to hear. Yeah, Ulysses Press, I asked because they do everything, when you work with a publisher, the publisher takes on a lot. And, I understood that, but I was also, hey, can I give you a mood board for like the cover? Can I, little things like that. And they were very open. They definitely got the gist of the cover and it was really beautiful. They were like, wow, yes, we understand what kind of look. And then when I got it physically, that paper the cover is made of is just really beautiful. I was like, oh my goodness, they got the fancy paper. I was so excited because I definitely felt the same, and one of the things that I've noticed for myself right now lately is that I don't have this big ownership over the book. Like I understand that I wrote it. I understand that I'm sharing my life work in there so far, but I also know that it's outside of me. And so I have friends, who, and this is still story. I had a friend and I was sitting with somebody else for dinner and somebody came and said hello. And they were like, hey, I haven't seen you. What's going on? And, I forgot to say I was an author. And my friend's like, you also wrote a book. I'm like, all right. And I wrote a book. I'm like, I just, because I don't have this big ownership, like it's my book, because I think it stands on its own so beautifully. And part of the energy that I think you feel is that because I wrote this not to promote myself as much as to promote these teachings and these rituals and these remedies for other people who really who have a missing link, and again, that's something that I've heard of a lot this past couple of months, traveling with the book is like, wow, this is something that, my family completely, you know, deleted from our life. So I'm so happy that I have something. And so I think that's what the book's energy is. And it's really beautiful to hear somebody like you say, wow, yeah, there's something with this book. I don't know what it is, which is really beautiful. But everything about it, from the way that it started, the way the publisher has treated it has been so, like you said, gracious that I'm really happy to see that somebody can feel the energetics of that. Because it definitely does that for me. Even though I read the book, I'm still outside of it and I can really sense that too. Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
is so powerful. Wonderful. Well, Josie, is there anything else that's still coming up for you that you would love to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Well, the reality that Latin herbalism is for absolutely everybody. We are a very generous community. And if anybody's interested, even in just herbalism, this is also a good book to start with. This is a good place to sort of like flip through and, say, oh, wow, this is sort of like what herbalism is really like. It's not disease tincture. Like that's not really what happens. That's the way it's being taught today, unfortunately. But it's not what its origins are. Its origins have a lot of depth, and this is a book that you can really get into with that and understand that and learn that. Um, and aside from that, just I'm happy that I came on the show. I'm happy to be able to chat with you and just talk about a little bit about everything. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us as well. We'll include the link to the book in the show notes, of course. And um, hopefully, many of you listeners and ones watching this on YouTube as well will find this book and read it and really benefit from its magic and beauty and the wisdom that it really contains. So I really encourage all of you to go and grab this book and add it to your precious collection. Josie, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. I've really loved our chat, and I'm very inspired about the work that you do and all that you also are and bring through in this sacred work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Amy. My pleasure.
Beautiful. Now, everybody, just for a moment, let's bring our awareness to this beautiful, inspiring energy that's been activated here and imagine sending that energy to everyone and everything on our planet. to remember that we are all truly one, and that the more of us have the courage to step into our sacred feminine power and explore perhaps our own lineages and the magic that they hold as well, the more quickly our planet will also heal and ascend. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here.